Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been 23 years since my last confession. Sister Catherine Marie sat perfectly still in the adjacent booth at St. Augustine's Cathedral in Baltimore, her hands folded in prayer as she waited for Father O'Malley to finish with his penitent. She had been covering confession duties for the elderly priest for months now, a privilege that came with her advanced theology degree and years of counseling experience. The rhythmic murmur of voices through the thin wooden partition had become as familiar as her own breathing. But something about this voice made her pause. There was a tremor in it, a desperation that cut through the usual cadence of routine confession. "That's quite a long time, my child," Father O'Malley's gentle Irish accent responded. "Brings you back to the sacrament today?" "What?" "I'm dying, Father. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 3 weeks left, and I can't meet God with this on my soul." Sister Catherine found herself leaning slightly toward the partition, not to eavesdrop, but because something about the man's voice seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. "Go on, my son. God's mercy is infinite." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of shallow, labored breathing. When the voice spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "I killed someone, Father, 23 years ago. A young woman. I made it look like an accident, but it was murder. Cold, calculated murder." Sister Catherine's blood ran cold. She had heard many confessions over the years, theft, adultery, violence, but something about this admission felt different, personal. "Tell me what happened," Father O'Malley said, his voice maintaining its gentle tone despite the gravity of the confession. Her name was Sarah Catherine Brennan. She was 24 years old, fresh out of graduate school, working as a social worker in Boston. She was investigating things she shouldn't have been investigating. The world seemed to stop spinning. Sister Catherine's maiden name had been Sarah Catherine Brennan. She had worked as a social worker in Boston 23 years ago, but she was very much alive, sitting in this confessional booth, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the cathedral could hear it. She had discovered what I was doing. The money I was stealing from the children's services budget, the way I was manipulating case files to cover my tracks. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, money that should have gone to help kids in foster care. She had documents, evidence. She was going to expose everything. Sister Catherine's mind raced back to those final weeks in Boston, to the case that had consumed her life and ultimately driven her to seek sanctuary in religious life. She had been investigating financial irregularities in the Department of Children and Families, following a paper trail that led to systematic embezzlement. She had compiled evidence, prepared reports, scheduled meetings with federal investigators. And then came the accident that changed everything. I followed her for weeks, learning her routine. She was so predictable. Same route to work every day, same coffee shop, same time. I knew exactly when she'd be crossing Beacon Street on that rainy Thursday morning. The coffee shop, Marley's Coffee on Beacon Street, where she had stopped every morning for a large French roast and a blueberry muffin. The rain had been coming down in sheets that October morning, the kind of Boston weather that made everything gray and slippery. I was driving a stolen car, license plates I'd taken from a junkyard. When she stepped into the crosswalk, I accelerated, hit her at 40 miles per hour and kept driving. Never looked back. Sister Catherine's hands began to shake. She remembered the impact, the sensation of flying through the air, the taste of blood and rain. She remembered lying on the wet asphalt, looking up at the gray sky, thinking she was going to die. She remembered the months in the hospital, the surgeries, the physical therapy, the way her entire world had shifted on its axis. But she was alive. How could this man be confessing to her murder when she was sitting 3 feet away from him? The newspapers said she died at the scene, the voice continued, and now Sister Catherine could hear tears. But I found out later. Later, I learned that was wrong. She didn't die. She survived. But she was so broken, so destroyed, that she disappeared, left Boston, changed her life completely. The investigation died with her disappearance, and I got away with everything. The partition between the confession booths might as well have been made of tissue paper. Sister Catherine could see the man's silhouette through the screen, could hear every labored breath, every sob that punctuated his words. I destroyed her life, Father. I stole millions of dollars from programs meant to help vulnerable children. And when someone tried to stop me, I tried to kill her. Even though she survived, I murdered who she used to be. Sarah Catherine Brennan died on that street that day, even if her body lived. Father O'Malley was quiet for a long moment. Do you know what happened to her after that? I hired a private investigator years later, when the guilt started eating me alive. He found traces, medical records, insurance claims, but then the trail went cold. It was like she vanished into thin air. The investigator's best guess was that she'd had some kind of breakdown, maybe ended up in an institution, or maybe she did die, just not right away. Sister Catherine closed her eyes, remembering those dark months after the accident. The broken bones had healed, but the trauma had nearly destroyed her mind. She had indeed disappeared, in a sense. The confident, driven social worker who had been determined to expose corruption and protect children had been replaced by someone consumed with fear, paranoia, and a desperate need to hide from the world. The decision to enter religious life hadn't been a calling in the traditional sense. It had been an escape, a way to disappear so completely that no one could ever hurt her again. Sister Catherine Marie had been born from the ashes of Sarah Catherine Brennan, and for 23 years she had successfully buried her former identity. What was the man's name? Father O'Malley asked gently. The one who stole the money? Richard Vincent Morrison. I was the deputy director of the Boston Department of Children and Families. I had access to everything: budgets, case files, vendor contracts. It was so easy to skim money, to create fake invoices, to redirect funds to accounts I controlled. Over 8 years, I stole nearly $3 million. Morrison. Sister Catherine remembered the name now, remembered the distinguished-looking man in expensive suits who had always been friendly to her, who had encouraged her work, who had seemed genuinely concerned about the welfare of the children they served. He had been her supervisor, her mentor, her friend, and he had tried to kill her. I used the money for gambling, for women, for a lifestyle I couldn't afford on a civil servant's salary. I told myself I was borrowing it, that I'd pay it back someday. But the deeper I got, the more desperate I became. When Sarah started asking questions, when she started connecting dots that would lead back to me, I panicked. The confessional felt like it was shrinking around her. Sister Catherine couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think clearly. 23 years of carefully constructed peace were crumbling with every word this dying man spoke. I need to make amends, Father. I need to find her, if she's still alive, and tell her the truth. I need to confess to the police, make sure the money gets returned to where it belongs. But I don't know how. I don't know where to start. Sister Catherine found herself standing up before she fully realized what she was doing. Her chair scraped against the floor of the confessional booth, and she heard both men on the other side of the partition fall silent. "Father?" Morrison's voice was uncertain now. "Is someone there?" Father O'Malley's Irish accent was strained when he spoke. "Sister Catherine, is everything all right?" She pushed open the door of her booth and stepped into the main area of the confessional. Through the screen, she could see Morrison's profile. Older, grayer, obviously ill, but unmistakably the man who had supervised her work all those years ago. "Hello, Richard," she said quietly. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Morrison gasped, a sound like air being sucked from his lungs, and she heard him fall against the side of his booth. That's impossible," he whispered. "You're dead. I killed you." "No," Sister Catherine said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Brennan. And in a way, you succeeded. But I'm still here. You tried to kill Sarah Catherine." Father O'Malley emerged from his side of the confessional, his weathered face pale with shock. "Sister Catherine, what's happening here?" Morrison was sobbing now, deep, wrenching sounds that seemed to come from the very core of his being. "Sarah? Is it really you? Oh, God, what have I done? What have I done?" The cathedral around them felt charged with electricity, as if the very air was holding its breath. Sister Catherine looked at this broken man who had shaped her life in ways he could never have imagined, and felt something unexpected wash over her. Not anger, not hatred, but a profound sadness for all the years that had been lost, all the lives that had been damaged by his choices. "The children, Richard," she said softly. "Tell me about the children. What happened to the programs that lost funding because of what you stole?" Morrison's sobs intensified. Kids went without homes. Families didn't get the support they needed. Some children stayed in dangerous situations because we didn't have the resources to help them. I don't know how many lives I destroyed with my greed. And the investigation? My files? My evidence? I destroyed everything after the accident, made it all disappear, transferred to a different department, covered my tracks completely. I thought I was safe. Sister Catherine sat down heavily in one of the nearby pews, the weight of 23 years of running suddenly pressing down on her shoulders. Father O'Malley sat beside her, his face full of questions he didn't know how to ask. "I need to call the police," she said finally, "and the FBI. If he's telling the truth about the money, about what he did, then there are still ways to make some of this right." Morrison struggled to his feet and stepped out of the confessional booth. He was thin, almost skeletal, his skin gray with illness, but his eyes were clear and focused on her face. "Sarah? Sister? I don't know what to call you. I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry." "I know," she replied. "I can see that you are. Can you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air between them like incense, heavy and sacred. Sister Catherine looked at this dying man who had tried to murder her, who had stolen millions from vulnerable children, who had forced her to abandon her entire life and identity. "I forgave you a long time ago, Richard," she said, and realized, as she spoke, that it was true. "I had to, or the anger would have destroyed me completely. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You still need to face what you've done." Over the next few hours, the cathedral became the center of a storm of activity. Police arrived, then FBI agents, then lawyers and prosecutors. Morrison, with Sister Catherine's help, began the process of confessing not just to God, but to the legal system he had corrupted. The media attention was overwhelming. The story of the nun who was supposedly murdered 23 years earlier, only to confront her would-be killer in a confessional booth, captured the public imagination in ways that made Sister Catherine deeply uncomfortable. But more important than the media circus was the work that began immediately. Morrison had kept detailed records of his thefts, hidden away in a safety deposit box like some twisted insurance policy. The money he had stolen had grown through investments over the years, and much of it could be recovered. Within weeks, the Morrison Foundation was established, funded by the recovered stolen money and dedicated to supporting children's services programs that had been damaged by his crimes. Sister Catherine found herself reluctantly thrust into a public role as the Foundation's spiritual advisor and primary advocate. "This isn't what I wanted," she confided to Father O'Malley one evening as they sat in the now quiet cathedral. "I came here to hide from the world, not to be thrust back into it." "Perhaps," the old priest said gently, "God has been preparing you for this moment for 23 years. Perhaps everything you've learned about forgiveness, about service, about healing from trauma, perhaps it was all leading to this." Morrison died 6 weeks after that day in the confessional, but not before seeing the first children's shelter, funded by the recovered money, open its doors. Sister Catherine was with him at the end, holding his hand as he passed, both of them finally at peace with the terrible events that had bound their lives together. The other sisters at her convent struggled to understand what had happened too. Their quiet, contemplative colleague. Sister Catherine Marie had always been reserved, dedicated to her work with troubled youth, seemingly content with the simple rhythms of religious life. The revelation that she had been living under an assumed identity, that her entire vocation had been built on trauma and escape, left many of them feeling shaken. "Did any of it mean anything?" Sister Margaret asked her one day as they worked together in the convent garden. "Your vows, your service, your faith, was it all just running away?" Sister Catherine considered the question as she tended to the tomatoes that would feed the community through the winter. "I don't think it matters why something begins," she said finally. "What matters is what it becomes. I may have entered religious life as an escape, but I stayed because I found something here that I needed. A way to serve others, a way to heal, a way to become someone better than I was before. And now? Will you stay?" Sister Catherine looked up at the sky, where clouds were gathering for an afternoon storm. "I don't know. For 23 years I've been Sister Catherine Marie, but I'm also Sarah Catherine Brennan, and she has work to finish. Maybe it's time to figure out how to be both." The integration wasn't easy. Sister Catherine found herself traveling frequently now, speaking at conferences about child welfare, working with law enforcement agencies to identify and prevent the kinds of systematic corruption that Morrison had perpetrated. She testified before Congress about the need for better oversight of social services funding. But she also returned regularly to the convent, to the community that had sheltered and shaped her, to the chapel where she had learned to pray not just for herself, but for others, including the man who had tried to destroy her. The confessional booth where it all began became something of a pilgrimage site for people seeking their own reconciliation with impossible circumstances. Father O'Malley, when asked about that extraordinary day, would only say that he had witnessed the power of truth to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. Sister Catherine kept Morrison's final letter, written just days before his death. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I want you to know that seeing you alive, seeing what you became, despite what I did to you, gave me the only real peace I've known in 23 years. You could have let hatred consume you, but instead, You chose something harder and more beautiful. You chose to let love win. Thank you for showing me that redemption is possible, even for someone like me. Years later, when people asked Sister Catherine how she had found the strength to forgive someone who had tried to kill her, she would tell them about the moment in that confessional when she realized that Richard Morrison was as much a victim of his choices as she had been. His confession hadn't just been about seeking forgiveness. It had been about finally choosing truth over fear, love over selfishness, service over greed. We were both transformed that day, she would say. He learned that it's never too late to choose right over wrong. And I learned that sometimes the person who hurts us the most is also the person who teaches us the most about the power of grace. 2. The confessional booth at St. Augustine's Cathedral still bears a small plaque commemorating that extraordinary day when a dying man's confession brought a buried truth back to life, and when forgiveness proved stronger than the desire for revenge. Sister Catherine Marie, who is also Sarah Catherine Brennan, continues to serve both God and the vulnerable children, whose lives were forever changed by one man's crimes and one woman's refusal to let hatred have the final word.